Nobody wanted his handmade guitars. Then Jimi Hendrix picked one up, and everything changed. Walter Reed had been building guitars by hand in his garage in Portland, Oregon, since 1961. Not a proper workshop, a garage with a second-hand workbench he had bought at an estate sale and a set of woodworking tools accumulated over years of careful saving. He worked in the evenings after his shift at the lumber yard, and on weekends when the light was good enough and his hands weren't too tired, and during the 2 weeks of vacation he took every August when his wife took their children to visit her mother and he had the house to himself and could work through the night without waking anyone. By 1967, Walter had built 41 guitars. He had sold 9 of them. The other 32 hung on the walls of his garage, or leaned in careful rows against the workbench, or sat in the closet of the spare bedroom where he stored finished instruments while he waited for buyers who rarely materialized. His wife had stopped asking when he was going to sell them. His brother-in-law had suggested more than once that maybe the market for handmade guitars was smaller than Walter seemed to believe. His co-workers at the lumber yard knew him as the man who built guitars in his garage, a harmless eccentricity, the kind of hobby that didn't hurt anyone even if it didn't seem to go anywhere. Walter understood the market well enough. Mass-produced guitars had improved dramatically over the previous decade. You could walk into any music store in Portland and find a decent instrument for a fraction of what Walter needed to charge to justify the hours he invested in each guitar. His instruments required 3 to 4 months of work each between the careful selection and aging of tone woods, the precise shaping of the neck and body, the installation and calibration of components, and the finishing work that gave each guitar its final voice. He priced them accordingly, and the price was simply more than most musicians were prepared to pay when a factory-made alternative was available and perfectly functional. What Walter was making and what the market hadn't yet found a language to recognize were instruments of a different order. He had spent 6 years studying the acoustic properties of different wood combinations, learning how maple paired with mahogany versus rosewood, discovering the particular effect of body thickness on sustain and resonance, developing an understanding of how the relationship between neck angle and bridge height affected the way a guitar translated a player's touch into sound. Each of the 41 guitars he had built represented a specific set of decisions about these relationships, and some of them, the best ones, were instruments that a serious player would recognize within 30 seconds of picking them up. The problem was that serious players rarely walked through his garage. In the spring of 1967, Walter drove his truck down to San Francisco with 6 of his best guitars in the back, wrapped carefully in moving blankets, hoping to find a music store willing to display them on consignment. He visited 7 stores over 2 days. 4 of them were politely interested but said their customers were primarily looking for Gibsons and Fenders. 2 said they might take 1 or 2 on consignment but couldn't promise much. The 7th, a small shop on Haight Street, run by a man named Davis Chen, agreed to take all 6. "I can't promise you anything," Davis told him honestly, hanging the guitars on the wall of his shop. "People come in here looking for specific things. Most of the time what they want is what they already know." 3 months passed. Davis sold 1 guitar to a session musician who had come in looking for a replacement for a damaged instrument and had picked up Walter's out of curiosity and then stood there for 20 minutes playing it before quietly asking the price. The other 5 remained on the wall. They were good guitars, Davis knew that much. Every musician who noticed them and picked one up commented on the quality. But commenting on quality and reaching for a wallet were 2 different actions, and the price that Walter's craftsmanship required was more than most visiting musicians were prepared to commit to for an instrument from a factory they had never heard of. 3 months of sitting, 32 guitars in Portland still unsold. A lumberyard worker in Oregon who had given 6 years of evenings and weekends to building something beautiful that nobody seemed to want. Then, on a September afternoon that Davis Chen would describe in detail for the rest of his life, Jimi Hendrix walked into the shop.
He was in San Francisco for a performance at the Fillmore Auditorium, and he had slipped away from his entourage for an hour to walk the neighborhood, the way he always did in new cities, looking for music stores and record shops and anything else that might show him something he hadn't seen before. He came into Davis's shop without particular purpose, browsing the cases of instruments near the door, not looking for anything specific, following the habit of curiosity that had always been his primary method of musical education.
Davis recognized him and said nothing, which was the right instinct. Jimmy didn't like being made a fuss over in shops. He liked to browse without pressure, and Davis had enough experience with musicians to know that the best thing you could do for a serious player in your store was leave them alone. Davis worked his way around the room in the unhurried way of someone with time and genuine interest, picking up instruments, feeling their weight and balance, occasionally playing a few notes to test the response. He was respectful of every instrument, returning each one carefully before moving to the next, demonstrating the handling habits of someone who understood the investment that instruments represented. He almost missed Walter's guitars. They were hung near the back wall, slightly away from the main display, and their appearance was quieter than the brightly finished production models that occupied the more prominent positions in the store. Where factory guitars had visual polish and the standardized good looks of professional manufacturing, Walter's instruments looked handmade in the best sense of that word, slightly individual, bearing the subtle variations that distinguished things made by human hands from things produced by machines. There was no brand name on the headstock, no marketing copy on a tag, nothing to tell a browsing customer what they were looking at. Jimmy stopped in front of them. He stood there without touching them for almost a minute, looking at them the way he sometimes looked at a piece of music before playing it, with a focused attention that was not analysis, but something closer to listening, as if the guitars were already speaking and he was trying to hear what they were saying. Then he took the nearest one down from the wall. The moment it was in his hands, something in his posture changed. Davis noticed it from across the room and would later struggle to describe exactly what he had seen, settling eventually on the word recognition. Not the recognition of a specific instrument, but something more fundamental, the recognition of a quality that he had been looking for without knowing he was looking for it. Jimmy sat down on the stool near the back wall and began to play. He played for 11 minutes without stopping. Not a performance, not a demonstration, not the kind of playing a musician does to test an instrument's technical specifications. He played the way musicians play when an instrument has convinced them that it deserves their complete attention, following musical ideas wherever they led, discovering as he went what the guitar was capable of and what it was not, mapping its voice and finding that the map was larger and more interesting than he had anticipated. 3 other customers were in the store when Jimmy began to play. All 3 of them stopped what they were doing within the first 30 seconds and remained still for the duration, not wanting to interrupt whatever was happening. When he stopped, the shop was quiet. "Who built this?" Jimmy asked. Davis told him about Walter Reed, the lumberyard worker in Portland, the garage workshop, the 6 years of evenings and weekends, the 41 guitars and the 9 sales, the 5 instruments still on the wall that hadn't found buyers in 3 months of being in the shop. Davis listened to all of this carefully. Then he looked down at the guitar in his hands. He wanted to buy all 5, he said. Davis Chen said nothing for a moment, because he was processing what he had just heard. "All 5, Jimmy confirmed, "and I want to talk to the man who built them. Can you get me his number?" Walter Reed was eating dinner with his family when the phone rang. He almost didn't answer it. He was tired from a long shift, and the call display showed a San Francisco number he didn't recognize, and he had reached the stage of unsold guitar accumulation, where he was not particularly eager for calls that might be music-related, because those calls were rarely the ones he hoped they would be. He answered it on the 4th ring. The voice on the other end said simply,
"This is Jimi Hendrix. I bought some guitars from a shop in San Francisco today. I think you built them." Walter set down his fork. The conversation that followed lasted 40 minutes and covered more ground than any conversation Walter had ever had about instrument building. Jimi asked questions that no customer had ever asked him before, not about price or availability, but about the decisions behind the work. Why this wood combination, what he had been trying to achieve with the neck profile, how he approached the relationship between body resonance and pickup placement. He asked about the aging process for tone woods and about what Walter had learned over 6 years of building that he hadn't known at the beginning. Walter answered every question carefully and honestly, and as he did, he began to understand that the person he was talking to had not bought 5 guitars on impulse or as a collector's acquisition. Jimi Hendrix had bought them because he had heard something in them that he had been looking for, and he wanted to understand where that something came from. Before the call ended, Jimi asked if Walter could build him a specific instrument with particular tonal characteristics he described in careful detail. He was not vague or casual about the commission. He knew exactly what he wanted and communicated the requirements with a precision that told Walter he was dealing with a musician who understood instrument construction at a level beyond what most players ever developed. He asked for 6 of them. Walter Reed told his wife what had happened after she came downstairs to find him still sitting in the kitchen at 11 o'clock with a notepad full of specifications and an expression she had not seen on his face in years. She read the notepad. She looked at her husband. She said something that she would repeat in various forms for the rest of her life whenever someone asked her about that night. She said, "I told him he should call in sick tomorrow. He had guitars to build." The 6 instruments Walter built from Jimi's commission were completed over the following year. Jimi used them in recordings and performances that were heard by millions of people, and musicians who heard those recordings and then learned what guitar he was playing began to ask about the builder. Walter's phone started ringing, not constantly, not overnight, but steadily in the way that reputation builds when it is built on the right foundation. The musicians who called were serious players, people who had spent years with instruments and knew immediately when something was different. They asked the same kinds of questions Jimi had asked on that September phone call, and Walter answered them with the accumulated knowledge of 6 years of evenings spent in a garage trying to understand what made a guitar more than wood and wire. By 1969, Walter's unsold guitars numbered 0. His waiting list stretched to 14 months. He had left the lumber yard and converted the garage into the proper workshop it had always needed to be, with adequate lighting and climate control and enough space to build the instruments that people were now willing to wait more than a year to receive. He never forgot that September afternoon. He kept a photograph of one of the 5 guitars Jimi had bought from Davis Chen's shop, framed on the wall above his workbench where he could see it every day, a reminder of what happened when the right person picked up the right instrument and recognized what it was.
What it was the real thing. It had just been waiting for someone with the ears to hear it. If this story of overlooked craftsmanship and the power of recognition moved you, please subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with someone who has ever believed in something that the world hadn't noticed yet. Have you ever found something extraordinary in an unexpected place? Tell us in the comments. Ring that notification bell for more stories about the moments when talent, patience, and the right set of ears finally find each other.